if you notice on your sheet up towards the top, I said the election process and how it used to be. Your textbook doesn't give you a lot of history about the election process, which is really, it's fine, but I think it's difficult to understand today how it works, some of the kind of quirks and weirdness, if you don't understand how it used to be, okay? 1968 was a major, major turning point in our presidential election process. So what I want to do is I want to show you a video clip of the National Convention that happened in 1968 and see if we can kind of draw out of that like what this process used to look like. And we'll see if you can kind of come up with it.
For Democrats, the Chicago Convention of 1968 was a nightmare. Leading after the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy, Democrats fell into chaos, fighting Chicago police and each other.
With George McGovern as President of the United States, we wouldn't have to have Gestapo tactics in the streets of Chicago.
Mr. Daley is not pleased. The senator with it.
How hard it is to accept the truth.
Vice President Hubert Humphrey, hobbled by the unpopularity of President Johnson and his Vietnam War policies, appealed for order.
Surely we have now learned the lesson that violence breeds counter-violence, and it cannot be condoned, whatever the source.
It did work. Humphrey's November defeat ushered in the era of Republican presidential dominance, with 7 GOP victories in the last 10 elections.
Okay. Whoa, not that. What happened, Majesty? What was going on there?
I'm guessing so the Democratic National Convention, well, I guess they didn't like what we, like, the different, the policies that the Democratic candidate had put out, that was already, like, being put out. They didn't agree with it, so I guess they were trying to protest or speak their voice and ended up getting conflict with the police.
Okay, that makes sense. Anybody else pick up on anything? Who did the party choose at the convention? Hubert Humphrey was the man that was chosen, okay? People around the country that voted or went to a caucus and participated as Democrats prior to the National Convention, Hubert Humphrey had not even been a candidate or an option for most of them. So really, like the people that were associated with the Democratic Party, a lot of people supported this man named George McGovern. McGovern was an anti-war candidate. He had tons of support. So could you, like, when you looked around the room at the kind of people that were at that convention, if you had paid attention, you saw a lot of old white guys, like people in suits. And prior to 1972, people like you and I didn't get to go to the conventions. So you and I would go, we would cast a vote in a primary, or we would go maybe participate in a caucus meeting, and we would say who we wanted. But then someone else would go to the convention, and they didn't necessarily choose who you and I chose. Primaries and caucuses were considered advisory. It was a suggestion from the people who were allied with the party in the precincts and in the local communities. But a person that went to the Democratic National Convention could choose whoever they wanted. Guys, they were drama, like high drama. Rounds and rounds of balloting, people taught like over and over and over, debating, deciding who should we choose. And you saw right there, they chose somebody who people hadn't even had an opportunity to vote for. How would that make you feel, Kendra, as a voter?
I'd be frustrated. I feel like my opinion didn't matter to them.
Absolutely. So you have party elites that are making all of these decisions on your behalf. Think about the time period, 1968. We've got people who have been fighting for suffrage, like visibly. We've had landmark legislation to actively enforce suffrage and make sure that people's vote actually matters. And then we have a convention where people have voted, and the elites that went to the convention didn't even choose who the people chose. So there was this huge disconnect. This is not the first time that happened. That happened repeatedly throughout history. You guys, there were people that were nominated by both parties at conventions, like back in the 1800s, where Franklin Roosevelt, he was a Democrat, right? But the Republican Party nominated him too at their convention the first time. Because it was less about you and I and what we wanted, and it was more about the elites thinking, who can we get to represent us, who's going to represent what the party wants. Have you ever heard that phrase, party machine, before? Yes or no? Have we ever heard that phrase, party machine? Nobody had, really? So a party, what does it sound like? Like a system, right? So it was kind of where like you had a few people, usually they controlled like wealthy businessmen and people that controlled industry, and they basically ran the party as a system, as a machine to accomplish what they wanted for themselves. Okay? All right, so after that then we're going to have something called the McGovern-Fraser Commission. The McGovern-Fraser Commission is going to say, look, there is a disconnect in how we're doing this. And so they're going to convene, and in 1972, this process is going to look really different. I'm going to show you a clip from the 1972 convention, and then after lunch we can kind of compare. This is a campaign commercial, but it still shows you what the convention looked like.
It was almost dawn in Miami when the final moment came. But the lateness of the hour did not dim the emotion in that hall. For the victory they celebrated was not his alone.
My nomination is all the more precious in that it is the gift of the most open political process in all of our political history.
The reforms had worked, for in Miami that night were people from the entire length and breadth of their party. Some were professionals, many were amateurs, but they all were Democrats, and they all shared the belief that this year, each of them would make a difference.
I'm a housewife and a mother and a dairy farmer. I have one son, 17, and he was very anxious to do the driving. And so he offered to take me down, but he also told me if I didn't vote correctly, I'd walk home, and his vote was for McGovern.
I've been in politics since 1960, and I think that's a difference between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party to begin with. I think the Democratic Party is the party of the people, the ones who care.
There were only 3 from the delegation that had read the Bendow Convention before. We were all new, and we didn't have a moment's free time. And, the first night went 10 hours.
People feel as if there's no way they can influence what happens. And I always felt that way. And in fact, that's the really great thing about I went to the National Democratic Convention, A lot of people said, oh, you lost prime time by being up all night. Well, that to me was great. And every delegate that was there stayed there and stayed with it.
The state senators and the members of the House of Delegates and all of these new people really worked hard.
The everyday person in our section, they were making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and salami sandwiches right there on the convention floor because they didn't have the money to eat in the hotels and restaurants. It wasn't a convention to play. The Miami people, the hotel people, and the restaurant people were very unhappy because we didn't play.
We worked hard on the floor, and we had freedom of the floor to work in the way that we wanted to work.
Lots of people are able to participate, and because they're participating, then the politicians, or he in this case, will have to listen to what the people say. He's going to respond to the people.
People were voting in their own conscience. I saw that myself. I saw democracy happening right there on the floor.
We all knew together this was great. We worked as a team. It was just fantastic. It was the first time I've ever seen anything that's supposed to not work.
This is the people's nomination, and next January, we will restore the government to the people of this country.
Okay, how did that convention look different than what we saw before?
Peaceful.
Okay, it was definitely peaceful, for sure. We don't have people getting mauled over. Absolutely. You see women there, you see people from different classes, you see like just regular Joe kind of people that are at that convention, okay? And what ends up happening is like that's really the case. They open it up. I'm not going to say that party elites don't go, but one of the major reforms is they say anybody who is registered as a Democrat may be a candidate or a delegate at the national convention. So no longer is it some kind of like fat cat in a suit that smokes and drinks, like not that kind of thing. It's somebody from us who's going to be chosen to go to that convention. Okay? So while you're at lunch and you're thinking really hard about this, I want you to think about how the difference, like how is that going to be different? If you're an elite delegate versus one of us, how is that going to change your decision making? Have a great lunch.